But an issue about the origin of the human race is that people read the description of the creation of Eve, and this is another one where the skeptics scoff at us. And this is usually where the jokes come in, about spare ribs and things like that. People just dismiss this story as being a sort of fairy tale. And that matters because I used to work in a university where there were a lot of feminists, and they didn't like what the Bible had to say about men and women. And their whole basis of that was that the description of the creation of Adam and Eve, well, that was just a myth. It was just a fairy story, or, it may have had a bit of theological significance, but it wasn't a real story. So it didn't have any significance. If they didn't believe in the theology, therefore, this was just an idea that Christians had in their head, and it had no authority over everybody. It only had authority for people who chose to believe it, because it didn't happen in the real world. And that's why it's important that we do take Genesis seriously and look at, yes, this is the God of the real world. The first statement about God creating human beings is, let us make man in our own image. We've dealt with a bit of that. God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. So male and female are deliberate, separate creations of God, because each was made in its own special way. So let's have a look at that. The creation of Adam and Eve. Adam is described as being made from dust of the ground, not from some pre-existing animal. That is really important. Adam was made from raw materials, if you like. In other words, the substance that was there in the ground, but not from some pre-existing creature. And Eve was made from tissue taken from Adam. Now, that's quite an interesting difference there, and it does matter. So we have a biological problem, right? Eve was made from tissue taken from Adam. Now, it's not as if there wasn't enough raw material around. I mean, there's plenty of dust of the ground. But God chose to make Eve from tissue taken from Adam. But of course, Adam was a man. Very clearly stated, Adam was a man. So we have to make a female from male tissue. So how did that happen? Well, it's all to do with chromosomes again. We've had chromosomes a couple of times recently, right? Chromosomes are your genetic information as it's packaged up in order for a cell to divide. When a cell is active, it's all unraveled, but still highly, highly organized. But for a cell to divide, it all has to be packaged up into separate little chunks, actually. And that's when we can actually see the packages of DNA. So these are chromosomes in a cell that's in the process of dividing. Now, they're all muddled up there. In order to work out whether this cell is from a male or a female, you can look at that picture and organize it a bit. Now, you used to literally have to do that by making a photocopy and literally cutting and pasting. Cutting and pasting did actually mean that, getting a pair of scissors and cutting things. It didn't mean pressing keys on a computer. But now we can do it with computer graphics. It's much easier, and they don't blow away if you breathe on them while you're doing it. And that's no joke. That's happened to me. I was doing. But anyway, if we organize all of our chromosomes, you can tell a male from a female just from the cells that you've taken, because the chromosomes tell you whether it's a man or a woman. This is from a man. We have chromosomes that are numbered 1 to 22. They come in pairs. Then we have a mismatched pair here. We have an X and a Y, right? Now, they are meant to be to go together, because the X and the Y are what determines whether you are a male or a female. So a summary of this person's chromosomes would be there's a total of 46 there, and significantly there's an X and a Y. So you write that as 46XY. Now, here are some chromosomes from a female, and what's the difference? Well, they're much prettier, aren't they? Actually, that's a fake staining technique. It is used to actually pick out the different chromosomes, but here we'll use the same staining technique where you're just looking at the overall structure. And this is from a female. So again, we have the same number. We go in pairs, 1 to 22, and then the 2 chromosomes that determine whether you're a male or a female. So in a female, you have 2 X's. So how are we going to create the female from the male? Well, God took from Adam's side, the traditional interpretation of that is rib. If you put your hand on your side of your body, yes, you do feel ribs. But it just says from Adam's side. So it is living tissue. Now, even if it was ribs, bones are actually full of cells. They're not just solid rock-like substances. They're full of living cells. So God could have got some living cells from ribs or from just tissue from the side. Now, all of those cells will have had an X and a Y chromosome in them, which God had originally created when he made Adam from raw materials. So God would have made lots more cells, but he's going to have to turn them into female cells. So he would take these cells, and all he had to do was take out the Y chromosome, right? God made the Y chromosome in the first place, so he could easily take that out. He made the X chromosome in the first place and put in another X chromosome. Now, God had already made the X chromosome, so he wasn't making anything new. So Eve was the same kind as Adam. She was still fully human, same as Adam. So Adam and Eve are the same kind. She's not a different kind of creature, even though she is a different gender. She is female. So there are some significant differences there. But God had already made the X chromosome, so she didn't have anything that Adam didn't have. Right? She just had 2 of them, and she didn't have a Y chromosome because a Y chromosome makes a human being into a male. And that is a significant difference that carries on until the present day. All men have Y chromosomes, women have 2 X's. And the X chromosome was not just there as a sort of spare for in order for God to give it to Eve. It is an essential part of male biology. Males need 1 X chromosomes for life. You just can't live unless you have an X chromosome. The cells are not viable. But females need 2 X chromosomes for their fertility. So they need 2 X chromosomes to be fully female in order to be fertile. So the X chromosome is actually essential for all human beings. So all human beings have at least 1 X chromosome. All females have an extra X chromosome or 2 X chromosomes. So we now have Adam and Eve as 2 individuals. They are unique creations, but they are of one flesh. Right? And that is specifically said in the Bible that male and female are of one flesh, so all of one kind. But even though they are unique creations, each made by God's creative power. And when God had finished that, when he had made Eve, that was last being human that he made, when he'd made all of the living things, God looked at all that he had made, and behold, it was very good. So that means it was very good that human beings were male and female. That matters to God, so it should matter to us. Now, why do we have all of these details? It is important to understand this is real history. It's not theological theory, and it cannot be reconciled with evolution, as we talked earlier about this Homo divinus theory, the idea that God somehow stamped his image on some sort of evolving human. That does not work. It doesn't fit with the Bible. But the Bible is the real history of the real world. So we do have to look at the biological facts and the historical facts, as well as the theological facts, right? Now, every now and again, you would Richard Dawkins, who is one of our bitterest enemies, actually says something right, and it's a real challenge to people who do want to try and combine secular evolutionary theories with what the Bible clearly says about the creation of Adam and Eve. And this is something he wrote in his book about evolution. All too many preachers, while agreeing that evolution is true and that Adam and Eve never existed, will then blithely go into the pulpit and make some moral or theological point about Adam and Eve in their sermons, without once mentioning, of course, that Adam and Eve never actually existed. If challenged, they will protest that they are intended a purely symbolic meaning, perhaps something to do with original sin. Richard Dawkins doesn't like the idea of original sin, right? Original sin, or the virtues of innocent. And here is his challenge to all of those people, whether they be bishops or whether they be ordinary people just sitting in the pew and listening. How is the person in the pew or on the prayer mat? Richard Dawkins is opposed to all religions, not just Christianity. So his reference there to Islam. How is the person in the pew or on the prayer mat supposed to know which bits of scripture to take literally and which bits symbolically? And that is a really good question. So Richard Dawkins does occasionally say some things that are right and put out some important challenges. But of course, Jesus is more right than Richard Dawkins. I don't know whether that's good English. We are having a wonderful time with language this morning, aren't we? But Jesus sums it up very clearly. Have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female? So Jesus is clearly affirming that in the beginning, God created male and female, and he said, therefore a man will leave his mother and father, and the two shall become one flesh. So male and female, separate, unique creations, but very clearly one flesh, and we are told how he did it. So we should take it seriously. God took flesh from Adam and made Eve. So two unique creations, but of one flesh. And that's a really important distinction between human beings and animals as well. And we need to take it seriously. And the other interesting thing is, if Eve was taken from Adam, that means that all of the people who live on the earth today and who have ever lived are descendants of Adam and Eve, of course, but then Eve was taken from Adam. So the entire human race can be subsumed into Adam. And that is why it matters that Adam was the first Adam and Jesus was the last Adam. And that has an important implication in terms of our history and our salvation. And if we can come back to us, and John, you have some important things to say about the two Adams and what's happened in between. If we can just finish with the slides there.